Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. So today we are going to be talking through 5 cognitive distortions and ways of thinking that you yourself may be experiencing if you have health anxiety, and then also other sort of deviations of anxiety as well. I just want to mention before I get in as well, what I'm going to be talking about today are thinking processes, so not necessarily behaviour but your actual thoughts. When it comes to health anxiety. And one of the most successful treatments, which is CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, aims to try and challenge these thoughts, to identify what you're thinking, and to challenge them so that you can get out of this pattern of irrational thinking that sort of reinforces itself. So hopefully these 5 tactics will help to give you a bit more knowledge about them, to maybe give you some more tools of how to respond to these thoughts, and hopefully just to try implementing different things. But what I also do want to mention is just remember that, you know, if you've had health anxiety for quite some time, what you don't realise that you've actually been doing the whole of this time is, you know, imagine you were tying a knot in a bit of rope every day of having health anxiety. You eventually having this really like huge knot, and that when you want to sort of take a reverse on health anxiety and to try and improve from it, you're going to have to spend a lot of time sort of unknotting the knots that you've made. So just bear that in mind, and that sometimes these tips that I give are not instant tips. They're just alternative ways of thinking that you will need to try and implement on a daily basis. Also, I have had some really fantastic feedback from my sort of health anxiety video. Essentially, when it comes to whether or not it's OCD, it's depression, whether or not, you know, it's a phobia or even health anxiety, even you don't even have to have any sort of medical underlying issue to experience irrational thoughts, and they're sort of cognitive distortions. So it's things that you're thinking that are not actually correct, and often these cognitive distortions and, you know, errors in thinking can have maladaptive sort of purposes, so it can actually be unhealthy for you to think these things. So the first one I want to talk about is one that I can actually pronounce, and I think it's called catastrophizing. I think that's how you say it. And this is essentially where you come to the worst possible conclusion. So essentially for me, this is exactly what health anxiety is, because you could have I don't know, like a little scratch. You could have so like before I started filming, I had like a little nerve, sort of like if I turn my head a certain way, I get like a real sharp shooting pain at my neck, and instantly I defaulted to, or I've previously defaulted to, the worst possible case situation, so that I was having an issue and then it could lead to a stroke and that sort of thing. So again, it's this incorrect way of thinking. But part of catastrophizing as well is underestimating your ability to cope. So you thinking to yourself, you know, oh my god, something's going to happen and I'm not going to be able to deal with it, and etc. and etc. So the ways in which that you can challenge this is you will always have a theory A, and theory A will be your irrational, out of proportion and incorrect thoughts. So for example, I'm going to say the typical one when it comes to anxiety in general. You get chest pains quite a lot, whether or not it's through tension or through acid reflux, anything like that at all. You start to get this pain sort of in your chest, and your theory is that I've got pains in my chest, and then the consequences of theory A is going to be that I'm having a heart attack and that I'm not going to be able to make it, and then it's going to get me just like that and I'm not going to know about it. The best way that I've found to try and tackle catastrophizing and to try and get out of that cycle of thinking is to create theory B. And that is, okay, this is how I feel and this is what I think is happening, but actually let's look at other case scenarios, and it could potentially be that actually I'm having chest pains because of tension. It could be that I've got acid reflux because the brain and the stomach is really well interconnected together, and the brain sort of diverts the stomach. But it could be that actually that is the reason that you're having these chest pains, and that you don't realise that because unconsciously or semi-consciously at the back of your mind, you're thinking something that makes you feel quite uncomfortable and quite anxious. And naturally you need to then look at the consequences of that, and it could be that actually you just go and take a Rennie, or you know, you sort of do some breathing exercises, that sort of thing, and then you actually start to realise that you can cope with the situation, but you've just defaulted to that really scary first case scenario. So in order to help you with catastrophizing, create theory A and also theory B as well, and then start to analyse them both together instead of looking at just the one worst case scenario. Number 2 is intolerance to uncertainty. So this was a massive one for me because I have a massive thing about, not like a controlling thing or anything like that, but I like things to be standardised. I like routine, and I also need to know what's sort of going on because I'm also quite a big planner as well, but also spontaneous, which is weird. I don't understand myself. So yeah, whenever I was sort of, well, whenever I was experiencing health anxiety, it was all the time, but whenever I was having sort of a flare-up, or I had like an obsession with something that I was obsessing over. So I listed loads in the previous video, but when things were like MS or ALS and cancer, that sort of thing, I basically needed to know the reason behind what I was experiencing. So I went through a whole few symptoms, and it was, you know, quite intense and whatever else. I explained a bit more about that in my 2 previous videos, which I'll link below. But I needed to know why they were happening. And I needed to know straight away, because part of health anxiety is that intolerance to uncertainty. You can't tolerate not knowing what's actually going on. And for that reason, you can't just brush these things off. So often for me, this meant that I was spending hours and hours on Google. I was looking at blogs, forums, Facebook groups, that sort of thing. So the best way to try and tolerate uncertainty is firstly just to accept, you know, that, and this isn't easy because you don't just go, oh, okay, I accept that nothing in life is certain, because actually that made me feel worse, because I was like, oh, I need to find some way of controlling this. But you need to try and find peace with accepting uncertainty, and that, you know, try and find things like, sometimes there's going to be things in life that are not, you know, are not certain and are not guaranteed, but actually really pleasant experiences. So for example, like, I don't know, if I walk to the shop tomorrow and I go and win the lottery, you know, like, nobody ever foresees that happening. So try to look at what's, you know, uncertain in life, but look at the positives, the things that often are uncertain but end up being a really good thing, you know. So try and aim for that. And then my second way to try and tackle this particular sort of irrational or cognitive delusion, oh my god, cognitive distortion, is to completely get rid of Google. And I often find that if you were to stay away from Google and it takes a lot to do this, because it's kind of a bit of an obsession, and actually looking at Google and stuff is like the compulsion. I'm going to talk a bit more about this in a video later on, but I'm not quite where I want to be with my reading at the minute in terms of like what I know about health anxiety and how it links to OCD. So that will be coming up in the future, but I do want to do a lot more background reading on this before I sort of splurt out my own ideas. But yeah, I find that if you sort of remove Google and take yourself away from that and sort of put a block between the obsession and the compulsion, you often end up finding that you just sort of, you feel a bit more at ease with uncertainty. This is really annoying. This is like, I don't know if I like it on my arm or what the crack is with it, so sorry if I keep adjusting that on my hair. That's all I seem to do on this channel. So the third sort of cognitive distortion that we can often get ourselves involved with is something called selective attention. And again, I spoke about this a bit more in my most recent sort of video, but this is essentially where you are paying more attention or less attention to things that kind of fit with your ideology. So I mean, some people, I don't know, it depends really on the type of person. So like, if I ever had some sort of symptom, let's just say for example I had a bruise, what I personally would do is I would go and seek out information that fitted the idea. So what I would do is see the bruise, I default to the worst case scenario, so catastrophizing, whatever it's called. And then what I would do is the knock-on effect of that is that you pay selective attention to things. Now, I know that some people actually avoid it. So for example, they'll see a bruise, they'll default to the worst case scenario, but what they tend to do is to avoid the situation. Now, avoidance is a bit more of a sort of behavioural thing rather than actual sort of cognitive thinking things. So yeah, I'm not going to talk about avoidance too much, but some people just generally ignore information that actually supports their view because they find comfort in that. But obviously well, I'll talk about this a bit more in another video, but it's something called negative reinforcement, which is where you are avoiding a situation in order to release yourself from the anxiety, and that's often what can get you hooked on these types of things. So with things like selective attention, firstly I would recommend sorting out sort of the catastrophizing, which then has a knock-on effect on the selective attention, because then you're not sort of seeking out different bits and bobs. But for me personally, what you then will have to do is a similar thing. So look at theory B, look at what other possible, scenarios they could be. So for example, I gave myself a really bad stomach at one point. I felt sick and I was like, I never feel sick, I never have stomach ache or anything like that. But I was so anxious from sort of like a previous experience that actually I kind of just avoided the whole possibility of it just being from anxiety. So maybe what I needed to do is to pay attention to other things that it could be, and more realistic things of what it could be. So for example, I only had a bad stomach when I started to feel anxious. So maybe if I paid a bit more attention to what it was that made me anxious, and then look at sort of the brain and the stomach connection, that could potentially help how you're analysing the information. Because what you want to aim for is full attention. You don't want to aim for selective attention where you're sort of cherry picking what you want, which fits with your own agenda. Number 4 I want to talk about, and that is all or nothing thinking. I do this all the time, and this was the one thing that I did not realise I was doing. So for me, I would put myself in a category of healthy or unhealthy. And often I would find that if I woke up one morning and I've got a bit of allergy at the minute, which is my throat is a bit like horsey. Horse? Yeah, not like giddy up horse, but horse. So yeah, I would put myself into the category of either healthy or unhealthy. And the reason for that is because my idea of what's healthy is to be this really, like perfect person, in the sense that you would not be tired at any point in the day. Everything, you'd almost just be like a superhero. Do you know what I mean? Like kryptonite, I just set myself these really high ideals of what I consider healthy, but actually it's so far from the truth, because everybody gets tired at some point in the day. There's siestas for a reason. There's coffee for a reason. We're not built to be at constant speed the whole time. We sort of have ups and downs. And for me, I think my idea of healthy is always on and up. I'd put myself into a category of unhealthy, which was like all the time, if I had the slightest itchiest of throat, or I had a bruise, or I didn't feel quite so good that day, So I was always putting myself in the unhealthy category, and I think once you tell yourself you're unhealthy so many times, you do believe it. And often I found that once I realised this was sort of enough for me to sort of realise what I was doing, so it kind of resolved itself once I realised that I was doing it. But I also found that another thing that helped me was to look at your health on a scale. So as far as I'm aware, nobody in this world measures your health on a scale. You are on like a continuum, which basically means you've got healthy at one end, unhealthy on another end, and you sort of just fluctuate between the two. And that is just say Sarah, that is life, that is how it is. Place yourself on a scale and then sort of talk to yourself or write it down, depending on how you sort of do these things, any evidence to support your claims. And again, this is a good way for you to practice full attention rather than selective attention. Try and think of the bigger picture. So if I was to have this, I would probably place myself here, but I'm actually placing myself here and I don't have it. So just try and rationalise that and sort of play around where you would actually put you on the scale. And the very last one is thought action fusion. Now, again, this was another one that sort of made me think, oh, hang on a minute. I thought I was just doing this. This is not anybody else. It was only me in the world that was thinking this. So thought action fusion is essentially where if you start to think about something enough, or you start to believe in it, it happens. That's not an observation, that is just a thought. That if I think something, it's going to happen. But it's interesting because let's just say you have an obsession with, I don't know, let's just say you have an obsession at the time. People with health anxiety go through different obsessions. So let's just say I have an obsession with heart problems, which tends to be a really, really frequent one. So if I spend too much time worrying or thinking that I've got a heart problem and it's definitely there and no one's picked it up yet, and I'm the only one that knows about it because I'm the only person that knows my body and my doctors are just missing things, blah, blah, blah. What you start to do is you start to think that it is going to happen, and you then start acting. Your thoughts sort of fuse into action, and then you end up finding that you get like heart, or what feels like heart issues. It's a really strange concept. Whilst I don't necessarily sort of sit there and think about an illness, and expect to get it, I try to stop thinking about it, and that just does not work at all. So for example, if I said to you, don't think of the purple elephant, you wouldn't be able to stop thinking about the purple elephant. You know, it would still be there. And that strain and the struggle of trying to not think about it causes a lot of distress in itself. So I mean, for me personally, this is a really difficult one. Because it doesn't just affect me, it affects other people as well. So for example, you know, like I remember this, like when my parent, oh God, I don't even want to think about it, like, is this bad? Because this is one that I'm really going to struggle to try and get over. So like if I was to think of somebody going to work, my mind would just think to a road accident, and that obviously would cause me like a lot of distress and thinking. Catastrophizing, there you go, without looking at sort of the bigger picture. And then because I thought in my head that if I think about this now, it's going to happen, and then you try to stop thinking about it, but it is like the most difficult thing to do ever, because you're telling yourself not to think about something, but then you're thinking about it. So yeah, so personally I haven't got you know, a sort of like a foolproof method of trying to help this, because it's going to be, I think it will always be with me, to be honest, you know, as much as I don't want it to be. But for me personally, I think having faith and trying to trust the situation and to, you know, sort of put it to the test. So for example, you know, looking at, right, okay, well there is the potential for a road accident to happen. There's always going to be the potential for that, just like there's always potential for the house that you're in at the minute to completely collapse at any given second, but the risk of it is still quite low. So what you need to do is work on probability more than anything. So it's less probable that there's going to be a road accident, and it's more probable that they're going to get to work and be safe and fine and all dandy. So I think trying to test that and just to implement trust, and to, more importantly, keep at it with trusting, with the trust essentially. So those are my 5 sort of cognitive distortions that you may be experiencing whilst you have health anxiety. I hope this has helped you in some way, shape or form. If you want me to do any more videos like this, then please do let me know and give me some ideas as to what you want to see. I have a lot to say, and it's really difficult to try and structure it so that it's not like super long. But yeah, thank you so much for the messages that you guys have sent me, and it's really nice, it's reinforcing, and it also helps me as well, so thank you so much. Right, thank you for watching today, and I shall see you in my next video. Bye.